Go ahead and get going. Good morning, and thank you for joining us this morning for our City Council work session, not work session, but our budget development meeting we have going. We'll go ahead and get started. Connie, could you please call the roll?
Here.
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 Here. Thank you. We'll move to agenda item 2 is the fiscal year 2025 budget presentation. Gene Hill, Chief Financial Officer, will present a draft budget proposal to council members for their consideration and input. Good morning. Gene?
Good morning.
Wow, your table is full.
It is. A clarification, just to make sure, were there questions that we had on healthcare we wanted to resolve first, or do you want me to just go ahead?
Why don't we go ahead and, well, we asked AJ to come down, so yeah, why don't we talk about the healthcare right now real fast. We'll talk about, let's do that. That's a good idea. Talk about the healthcare. AJ's here. We don't need to waste his time down here any longer than we need to, so let's do that. Heather.
Good morning, Heather Buchanan, Human Resources Director.
I'm AJ Argyle with GBS Benefits.
So council before them and the mayor, and I've given one to Connie, you should have a handout. The first page is the 3 slides from yesterday's presentation. The second page is just, I think, another slide from the presentation. It just tells you rates. And then the third page is just a comparison of some of the high-level overview items between the different plans. And the fourth page is the fiscal year 2025 costs by carrier, divided by fund, just so you have that information available. You would ask for AJ to be here to ask specific questions, so he has happily traveled down to address those today.
Thank you, AJ.
Happy to be here.
If we're ready to get started?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Let's do it.
Mr. Mayor, if you'd permit me, I have a big group of questions, if that's okay.
Okay, let's do it.
AJ, I work in home health, and my company has a team that does contract negotiation. That is for both us as employees as well as our reimbursement rates from carriers creating agreements and contracts to reimburse for our patients. I gave them a call and I asked them, what questions should I ask? Because I think half the game is knowing what questions are to ask in order to get the best info. And so I apologize if this feels a little bit like an interrogation, but I've got a handful of them. So I want to start by just giving the context to our insurance experience. Heather pointed out that our insurance experience is higher than it's ever been. You have the context of multiple clients of our size. How bad is our experience right now?
If you want to be completely honest, you're probably running hotter than any of my large groups, any groups over 100 right now. You are, and when I say hotter, I mean that means the experience is running higher than any of my other groups right now.
Do you see any reason it would drastically reverse in the near future?
You do have some large claimants that are falling off, and that is the information that we passed on to all the carriers that bid, and they all took that into consideration, and that's how we got the rates down to what they are. As far as having a drastic change, I don't see that coming. I feel like in the next 12 to 18 months, there are some things that we could do to possibly right that ship. And we've talked about those and that with the mayor and Heather, and I think that's the direction we're going to go with that. But as far as immediately, no, and that's why I think it's really important for us to get, a good rate and then a lock-in on next year, which gives us time to kind of correct that.
So there's no reason necessarily to say we're going to weather this 1 year, stay with, and just keep our insurance the same with the hope then that in 12 months we'll be ready to come back as a much more competitive applicant.
I don't see that. Is that possible? Yes, but I think the chances are slim to none right now based on our large claimant listing and then, our experience. And like we talked about, we ran 186% loss ratio last month in May. So that means basically for every dollar that we paid Blue Cross, they paid out $1.86 in claims.
Okay.
So.
Moving then to the coverage of the 3 different plans. We have Blue Cross, Select Health, Pacific Source. Heather handed out a spreadsheet that has some of these different benefits based on an individualized rate, but I'll let you speak to it. In terms of things like copay, out-of-pocket, deductible, x-ray, ER, prescription drugs, are there any significant differences between these plans?
The biggest significant difference is going to be Select Health.
Okay.
Select Health offers what's called a bundled copay. And what a bundled copay is essentially anything that takes place in a doctor's office is going to be covered at 100%. And what I mean by that is, so if you go in and you have, say, a throat culture done, you have a sore throat and they do a throat culture, the way it works right now is that throat culture would go towards your deductible. But where that throat culture was done in the doctor's office, what would happen with Select Health is that would just be part of your copayment. So the way it works right now, you'd pay the $85 or $88 for that throat culture. That would go towards your deductible unless you've already hit your deductible. With Select Health, you would just pay like a $30 copayment and that would be covered. Same thing with lab work. If you went in, if they have an in-house lab, that would be covered at 100%. Same thing with an X-ray. If they have an X-ray machine in there, which most do, that would be covered. That's probably the biggest benefit there. The other benefits that change is going to be your RX. Your RX is a little bit better with Select Health and Pacific Source. We don't have the same amount of tiers. I think that would be a little bit better for the employees as well.
RX being prescription drugs.
I apologize. Yes, RX. Yes, you're right. Yeah, thank you for the clarification there. Yes, RX for prescription is what that would mean. And then the ER benefit, I think was just the ER benefit was actually the same on all of those. That was another group I was thinking of.
So let's move then to network questions, because I think that was the biggest considerations that council had on Tuesday. We currently have Blue Cross, and the biggest concern with a lot of that we have for employees is that they have massive, if there are gaps in network differences. Let's start, I guess the first question I have is, how many doctors do we have that are currently in regular use by our employees that would move to an out-of-network status if we were to switch either to Select Health or Pacific Source?
Usually what we do in that situation is we would run what's called a provider disruption report. I would order a report from Blue Cross of Idaho with the top 100 facilities and doctors, and then we would actually compare that and see if there's any of those that are out of network. And so I've done that on my other groups that I moved, like the City of Idaho Falls is currently with Pacific Source. The City of Rexburg has been with Pacific Source and is now with Select Health. Usually on that top 100, I have 2 or 3 that are out of network, and that always ends up being an out-of-state issue. Someone's got a kid on a mission or someone's going to school out of state. I haven't had any issues inside the state of Idaho with any of my groups where that's been an issue, but the only way to know that for sure would be to run that disruption report. And if we did change carriers, that's something that I would run and we would look at and we would have that discussion. So.
I want to then move to individual questions for each of the other 2 providers or carriers that we're considering in lieu of Blue Cross. The first of which is Select Health. What are the major network differences between Select Health and Blue Cross?
The biggest difference is going to be the University of Utah. You're going to lose the University of Utah if you go with Select Health. And the disadvantage to that is I think they're our 3rd most utilized facility. So that could be an issue for some of your employees. And generally employees that are going to the University of Utah have something specialized. They're getting treated, and so they are going down south to get that done. Now, the thing to keep in mind with Select Health is generally most of the physicians are actually in network with the University of Utah. But the problem is if you need a procedure done, you can't utilize the University of Utah facilities. And most of those doctors are contracted directly and they can't use an IHC facility. So what happens is Intermountain Healthcare owns Select Health. And so you'd be forced to go from the University of Utah down south to IHC. I mean, it's not going to affect a lot of employees, but what I found with some of my other groups, we moved to Select Health, it's generally a specialized condition that they're going down south for. And so they're a little frustrated that they have to change physicians, because generally that's the best case scenario for them. If they do need a procedure or something done, is to change physicians and get to an IHC facility. So that's the biggest difference there with that one.
Does that mean Bingham is in network with Select Health?
Bingham is in network. Yeah, in Idaho, and I apologize, thank you for pointing that out. In Idaho, you're not going to see really any difference. There shouldn't be any difference between any of the 3 carriers. All 3 carriers, the network is almost identical. You may see a one-off here or there, but generally if someone is out of network, we bring them in and pull them in. I don't think you're going to see any differences in Idaho, Southeast Idaho with any of those 3 carriers. I think that should be the same. The big difference, like I said, is just going to be that University of Utah with Select Health. So.
If there's a case where there's a doctor that is out of network, what are the means of reconciling or helping employees overcome that?
So generally with most carriers, there's not a whole lot you can do. Like with Blue Cross right now, if they're out of network, they're out of network. You're going to pay an out-of-network benefit. With Select Health, I don't have any experience with this, but I've been told that they can negotiate and work something out. I know they had some issues building their network around here years ago, and they've done a really good job of building that. Pacific Source is probably the easiest to work with in that regard, in all honesty. If you have someone that's out of network, and I have plenty of experience doing this, they will actually go and negotiate what's called a one-off contract, where they will go directly to that provider, and they'll say, hey, we have this person coming in, will you accept in-network status for just this one person? And we can generally get that signed off, and that'll actually work for just that one person. I've done that several times. Even I did it recently for someone in the city of Idaho Falls at the Mayo Clinic who needed a surgeon in network. We were able to get that in network, which significantly lowers the out-of-pocket liability for that employee, which is really good. And I've even done that retroactively with Pacific Source. They're actually really good about working with us on that. So,
Lastly, on Select Health, what other cities or clients do you currently have who've used Select Health? And what has their experience been? I guess experience in the general sense, not in the insurance sense.
So to be honest with you, we moved the city of Rexburg this last year from Pacific Source to Select Health. Experience has been really good. Anytime you change carriers, there's going to be little minor hiccups. It doesn't matter what carrier we go with. There's always going to be little issues in that. But honestly, it's probably like one of the cleaner moves we've had. Haven't had any issues. I had a lot of employees had really positive experiences with it and really enjoyed it. The only disadvantage to it is I had some people at the University of Utah that were having some things taken care of. Their doctors were in network, but they were worried like if they needed to have a surgery or something, utilizing the University of Utah. So that was probably the only negative there.
That was changing to Select Health?
That was to Select Health. And then I'm currently moving a school district with about 500-600 employees over to Select Health. And so far that process has been great too. And they're super excited about moving forward with Select Health and the bundled copay. The employees are just ecstatic about that. So,
Flipping over to Pacific Source, what are the big network differences from Pacific Source versus Blue Cross?
honestly, in this area, I'm not familiar with any differences at all.
Is University of Utah in network then?
University of Utah is in network. So is Primary Children's, Huntsman, and that is the thing with Select Health. Huntsman and Primary Children's is in network as well. But yeah, Pacific Source, honestly, I don't think you'll see any differences in the network between Pacific Source and Blue Cross. I haven't seen any issues or had any issues with the network between those two carriers, and I've switched quite a few clients.
And that includes Bingham.
Correct. Bingham is in network.
You say you've talked about in the past that you've had success with Pacific Source in getting these one-off contracts. What are the situations in which Pacific Source typically approves one-off authorizations for patients to see doctors?
So I'll give you an example of one that I had for another city here locally. Had the employee come to me and they had a specialized cancer that they felt like they needed a specific surgeon for. It was a rare form of cancer, and this surgeon had a lot of experience with that. This surgeon was at the Mayo Clinic. He was out of network, and the employee says, I don't care what it costs. This is for my husband. This is a big deal to me. I want to make sure he's taken care of. We want the best care for him. I'm going to do this regardless, AJ. What do you suggest I do? I go, give me a couple days. Let us work on it, and let's see what we can do. So I reached out to Pacific Source. Pacific Source reached out directly to that provider, worked that out to where they took the in-network, which was amazing that they were able to do that. And of course, the Mayo Clinic was in network, so that was a non-issue, and we were able to get the surgery taken care of in network. And I thought that was, that says a lot, I think, about a carrier to step up and do that one-off. I mean, they've got a lot of things going on. They've got, hundreds of thousands of clients, and they were able to go out and negotiate that for us. And they've also done that on the back end on one I had where someone went and had something done that was out of network. We went back, and that provider actually signed and gave us a retroactive in network for just that one-off and allowed us to do that. So.
It says that they use the Aetna network, and we have had previous poor experience with Aetna. Can you describe the difference between the insurance carrier of Aetna and the network of Aetna?
So, Aetna was a bit messy for sure, and I understand a lot of the fear and that goes into everyone after what we dealt with Aetna. I mean, that was something, one of the first thing that Heather and I cleaned up was the Aetna mess. So the way it works is Pacific Source is the carrier. And Pacific Source is a regional carrier. So their service area and their main offering is in Idaho, Oregon, Washington, and Montana currently. So they've built their own network in those areas. And in the past, what happens is they tapped into a network for outside of that area. And that network used to be First Health. And what we call that is a wraparound network. And a lot of carriers will do this. And if you do a third-party administrator, you're self-insured, you go out and you contract for that network. So you lease a network from someone else. And so what they did is they used to have First Health. The problem is we had some holes in New Mexico, a little bit in California and stuff with some of our groups that have clients across the nation. So they actually partnered with Aetna and they leased the Aetna network. So what happens is they pay a fee to Aetna, and Aetna allows them access to their network. So they're completely separate. They don't have anything to do with each other outside of the fact that Pacific Source pays a fee to access Aetna's network, if that makes sense.
And the issues in the past with Aetna have been carrier-related, benefits package-related, not network-related.
They were network related in this area. We found, honestly, like between 20 and 25% discount savings between Blue Cross and Aetna. We will not be accessing the Aetna network in this area. Pacific Source has their own network that we're going to be accessing. Aetna's network is actually really strong outside of Idaho, but for some reason, the national carriers have been unable to really get aggressive and get competitive in this market. United Healthcare is probably the only national that has a decent network in Idaho. The rest really haven't been able to do it. Cigna's probably number 2, and Aetna's probably a distant 4th or 5th, unfortunately. So we won't access anything to do with Aetna in Idaho.
Okay, so the Aetna part is kind of, the network is really actually a hybrid of Pacific Source and Aetna, rather than just the true Aetna network.
Yeah, it's not really, has nothing to do with that in the network around here that you would actually directly deal with, and even in Utah a little bit, but yeah, I mean, it's completely separate.
Okay. One of the things that I've had experience with on Pacific Source is that on the home health side, we deal a lot with Medicare Part C. That does not involve our employees. That's for typically retired over the age of 65 to access. Pacific Source recently withdrew from Idaho on their Medicare Part C plans. They addressed that in an email that they sent to council, that they helped to clarify that a little bit. Can you speak, they specifically said that the finances around the Medicare program are of such that they are going to need to make changes. Can you speak to that in terms of, does that raise a concern for us with going Pacific Source if they're withdrawing their Med C offerings in Idaho as well?
No, and so my understanding on that, to clarify that a little bit, is so what happened is on their Med C, as you know, sometimes there's a premium, sometimes there is not a premium. They had a $100 premium on their Part C, and all their contracts were with that $100 premium. Well, most of the other carriers, they didn't have a premium, so they hardly had any enrollment in that product. And so what happened is, and you have to file this with the state, is they had it filed with that $100 premium. They had to pull that back, and now they've got to go back and renegotiate those discounts with the providers because they did those discounts assuming they had a $100 premium. Now they want to go out with a $0 premium to match everyone else, and they've got to redo that and rebuild that network and all that. And that network, so when you have Medicare, that's a completely separate network as opposed to what the group plan is. Same thing with your individual products. That's generally a separate network from your group plans as well. So.
Okay. Couple of last questions on Blue Cross. They went for profit 3 years ago, as Heather discussed a little bit on Tuesday. What has been the impact on their rates and offerings of them making that switch?
It seems like they haven't been near as flexible on the renewals and their rates. Blue Cross, I think, was kind of seen as the 800-pound gorilla in the state. And since they've kind of changed to for-profit status, it seems like the renewals have been a little bit higher. And I think the mayor and Heather can probably agree with that. And they've been a little harder to get down than they have in the past as far as their rates. And so, and if you look at what they've kind of done across the state, it seems like they're a little bit vulnerable. And as Heather pointed out, you know, the other carriers smell blood in the water, and they've been really aggressive with going out and trying to get market share from Blue Cross based on that. So
I know you represent a lot of clients of our size, bigger or comparable at least. Have you seen drastic shifts in your business and your clients away from Blue Cross?
To be honest with you, probably 3 to 5 years ago, I had 95% of my large group clients. And that, when I say large group clients, I mean anything over 100 with Blue Cross of Idaho. And probably by the end of this year, going into next year, if you guys stay with Blue Cross, you'll be my last group with Blue Cross of Idaho. I'm in the process of moving an 1,800 employee school district away from them, another 500 man school district. We've got another 1,000 man self-insured employer that's going to leave them this year. We've got quite a few that are kind of shifting away from Blue Cross, which is the complete opposite of where it was 3, 4, 5 years ago. So,
my last question: we have a limited ability to leverage tax dollars, right? The state sets a cap that says how much we can increase our budget year over year, which means there is a fixed budget that we cannot go over. But I don't think that's necessarily unique in the sense that companies, school districts, others have fixed budgets for what they can offer for benefits as well. What happens to, like, if the solution is not moving insurance providers, what solutions do clients typically look to when they're trying to reduce their insurance costs?
The big one is cost shifting. That would generally be where the employees would pay more of the premium. That's a big one. The other part would be, you'd basically water down your benefits. When I say water down your benefits, I mean you'd increase your deductible, increase your total out of pocket, increase your co-payments on the prescription drug as well as the doctor co-payments. And those are the types of things that you would see if you're trying to cut your costs moving forward.
Great. Thanks for the interrogation, AJ. I appreciate
You're
it.
welcome.
All
Thank
right,
you.
thank you. I got Brent and then Rick.
Hi, good morning.
How you doing? Good morning.
I have several questions for you here.
Okay.
So could you explain sort of the network versus the in-network versus out-of-network, what that actually means to the insured? And if you were to hire somebody out-of-network, how bad can that get financially?
So the big thing when you go out of network is you have a separate out of pocket, which is higher than your in-network out of pocket. But the most dangerous thing about going out of network is what's called balance billing. And what balance billing means is the insurance carrier takes what's called UCR, or usual, customary, and reasonable, for a certain service. Let's say you have a back surgery, and let's say that the between the provider and the facility, they charge $250,000. Let's say the insurance carrier comes back and says your usual and customary and reasonable charges for that is $180,000. So what'll happen is the insurance carrier would basically issue you a check, and then you would be responsible for making up that difference between the $250,000 and the $180,000, and that would be called a bounce bill. And that facility and provider could bounce bill you that difference, that $70,000. That's why it's so important to stay in network, and that's why with those one-off contracts and things like that, that becomes a big deal, because it's not just the additional out-of-pocket that you're going to have on the out-of-network services; it's that balance billing issue that you could run into. So.
Okay, and that sounds like that could be catastrophic.
It depends on what it is. Yes, it could be, and that's usually when we get involved and we try to help them negotiate those things. So,
All right. And Select Source, they use the IHC network. Is that
correct.
right? And,
Yes.
and is that a pretty good network to be in?
so honestly, in Utah, Select Health, everyone wants to access the IHC network, the Select Health network. They have the best, the strongest network in Utah, and the reason being is IHC is the largest, facility in Utah. So everyone's trying to access that. The only one that does have access to the IHC network or the Select Health network is actually United Healthcare, and that's because they have a partnership in other areas. Select Health actually accesses the United Healthcare network outside of their service area, kind of like Pacific Source accesses Aetna. Select Health accesses United Healthcare. That's their wraparound network.
I see. And how is their network nationally?
Nationally, it's the United Healthcare network. It's great. In Idaho, Select Health has everyone in network that Pacific Source, Blue Cross, Regents, all the Idaho carriers do. I've had no issues with that too. I mean, that's been pretty seamless, to be honest with you. The groups that we have moved to Select Health, I honestly haven't had any network issues in Idaho. And if we did, we could, definitely address those as they come up. So.
All right. And then you said you've moved most of your clients away from Blue Cross. Where have you been moving them to mostly?
So honestly, the majority's probably been to Pacific Source, and then next would be Select Health. So I said, I've got that school district we're moving to Pacific Source. The city of Idaho Falls with Pacific Source. The city of Rexburg was with Pacific Source for a couple of years. Then Select Health came with a little bit better rates there with them. But I am moving that other school district to Select Health as well. So
Is it a pretty close call?
it is pretty close. I'd say Pacific Source has got the edge as far as overall, but then Select Health will be right there with them. So just barely below.
Thank you. That's all.
Okay, Rick?
Mr. Mayor, AJ, during Councilor Mansfield's questioning, you mentioned that there was a school district, you just mentioned it again, that you had moved to Select Health. With the legislature's action recently to allow school districts to go on the state plan, why would, and I've heard from several school districts in our area that that's one of the best things they've ever done, because it lowered costs, both for the district and for the employees. Why would the school district move to Select Health instead of that state plan?
Because generally, in most cases, that doesn't lower the cost for the school district. I don't know if you're familiar. Are you guys familiar with Idaho Falls School District? I mean, that was national news for a while. They were $4.5 million short on their budget. $2.5 million of that was moving to the state plan. And generally, the reason for that is The school districts generally pay 100% or 90 or 95% for the employee-only coverage, but they generally don't pay anything for dependents. And on the state plan, the way it works is you have fixed rates. You have to pay a certain amount for even dependents. You don't get to choose your rates. You don't get to choose your plan. This is basically a cookie cutter design, and this is what you're going to take. And for most school districts, because they're not paying anything towards dependents, it costs significantly more. One of our school districts, the one that we're moving to Pacific Source right now, I think it was $3.5 million. Like I said, Idaho Falls School District was $2.5 million more, which obviously contributed to their budget moving forward. I know, like, you're probably referring to Pocatello School District is what I'm assuming.
Well, I've dealt with 6 school districts in the last year, and they've all moved to the state plan.
Yeah, and the ones that have done, I think it's worked out for some of them. It's worked out okay. I had a couple of my schools that have gone over to it. Like I said, Idaho Falls School District has really struggled with that. And then also another one is just right teetering on that. It's a little different for schools, the way it works as compared to, like, a city or a county. But overall, I think the expense is significantly more, and we were able to do it for less with some of these other carriers than honestly even what you could with the state plan. So,
Mr. Mayor, if I may follow up.
Absolutely.
Isn't it generally a rule in insurance that the larger the insured group, you've got more shared risk and the individual cost is less?
yes and no. So the advantage to like the state plan or like the statewide school plan, some of those, you get a lower administration cost. The way it works right now, based on PPACA, ACA, Obamacare, whatever you want to call it, basically for every dollar that you give an insurance carrier, 15 cents of that dollar can go towards administration. And generally when you have a larger pool like that, they will pull that number back and they won't ask for the full 15 cents. That's where the biggest savings goes. Generally what they say actuarially is that anything over 1,000 is the same. And now what it boils down to is the health of your pool. So once you have 1,000 people on that plan, you are considered viable as far as that goes. And so more or less people isn't necessarily going to make that better after 1,000. What's going to make that better is the health of your overall group. So at 1,000, you're viable. And then the only advantage is something larger like a state plan or a statewide school or AAA or GEM plan or any of those is the size that allows you to get a little bit better, lower administration rates. And that's generally where you see the difference there.
Thank you.
Other questions, council? Okay, thoughts?
Thoughts on which plan?
Well, on the works, yeah, on the works. I know what my thought process is on this one. There's a lot of information that we've just received, so.
I'll go if I may. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. No, go.
No.
Is it a question?
Yeah.
Then ask your question.
You've asked 40. Finish with 33.
I'm done asking questions. When I say I'm done asking questions, I mean it.
I mean it. All right, Corey, and then we've got another one over here.
Yeah, just
Okay, Corey's got one, and then Brent's got one.
Holistically, I mean, you've seen what we do and how we function within like our claims and, you know, how we function within the interaction of us and our insurance provider. So just from your own thought process and looking at what you see that we do, our claims, our visits, and so on and so forth, which one of these fits us best in your professional opinion?
Honestly, we can make any one of these three work because honestly, all three of these are very good carriers. I mean, if it's purely a financial decision, I think that speaks for itself. But as far as each insurance carrier, I think they all do a really good job. I think they all have really good customer service. And to be honest with you, Heather's office and myself, we can make any one of these work. And I don't think, honestly, for the employee overall, they're going to be able to tell a difference between any of the three carriers. I think any of the three carriers are going to be very comparable, and they're not really going to change much for the employee outside of maybe that select health benefit, that bundled copay. I think that's where there's a little bit of a difference there.
Okay, Brent?
I'm good.
Oh, Brent's good. Okay. Hey,
When did you say this has to be decided?
we probably really needed a decision on, well, we definitely need one before August, that second week in August when we publish the budget, or when we give direction to legal to prepare the ordinance for the budget. The sooner the better, so I would say we should be able to think about it, sleep on it, and make a decision the 11th of July. Would be probably my drop dead weight date, just so that we have an idea of what it is. It gives everybody a time to think about it and consider it. And so that's kind of my thought process. Yes.
And that being said, I think and I appreciate all the questions that have been asked today and you coming here, because this gives us a lot more information to look at and consider. But I would like some time to consider it and to digest all of this and think about what is best. I know we need to make the decision as soon as possible, but my feeling is, for our budget purposes right now, I would like to leave it where it is, because that's the highest amount. It's easier to come down than it is to go back up. And so I would like to leave it at Blue Cross, but that's not necessarily the decision. That I'm not making that decision yet. I would just like to have some more time to really look at this and yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at the moment.
Well, that was going to be my suggestion to the council, is to do just that, so that you can digest this stuff. I do have a question. It looks like
Comments, if
a
that's,
comment, absolutely.
if now's the time. I think that it would be, I don't see any reason we stay with Blue Cross. I see zero. Based on the comparatives, I don't see a significant difference, especially on the Pacific Source side, that I think there's any reason to stay with Blue Cross. I really am concerned, even if we can make the budget work with a Blue Cross this year, my big concern then becomes next year. If it's true that we don't expect our experience to improve significantly over the next 2 years, I would be concerned about our capacity to receive competitive bids from the likes of Select Health and Pacific Source again if we choose not to go with them, despite any meaningful difference, or that we're able to negotiate the same rate. I think then that it would be significantly more prudent to go with one of these other options, because if next year, there's going to reach a point where our benefits, especially at these Blue Cross percentage rates, we're going to hit a ceiling, and we are not going to be able to continue to offer the same benefits for the same number of employees if Blue Cross continues at this rate. That either means resulting in layoffs or hiring freezes, or it would result in having to, as AJ talked about, decrease our actual offerings of coverage that we offer. That means our employees are paying more out of pocket when they go to the doctor every time. And so I would be more in favor, I think we should go with Pacific Source. I would prefer to build the budget with Pacific Source, and then I would rather have a tax solution worksheet that identifies the insurance savings by fund, and then have the department heads come through and say how they would prefer to allocate that money for other projects and where those savings could be used.
Okay. I think that's a good argument.
That's my
You can-
proposal.
I do feel like we ought to leave it where it is, so that we can drop it back down if that's ultimately where we come from. We have a lot of information here to digest. I have a few people that I still need to get a hold of, that I would like to get a hold of still. Some actual users, not the HR people and stuff that run the plan. And AJ is, as good as the two of them are up there, I like to talk to some of the employees that actually are in the middle of it too, and see what kind of headaches they have and stuff like that. And so I've been able to speak to a few of them, but there's a few more that I would like to visit with. And
If I might ask.
July 8 would be, or 11 would be a good time for, that should give me enough time to be able to visit with them and find out. And I would encourage you to reach out to employees of places. A school district was with Pacific Source. We all know some school districts, some teachers around here, see how they work. Select Health has a number of people that have that insurance. And so what I would do is recommend that. But
If I might make one cautionary tale, caution in doing so, I think there are two concerns that have to be considered when that takes place, when you discuss with people who are either previous users or who might be future users. Number one, I think without experience of the way in which the city operates insurance plans, it's very different to compare experiences. When you have someone like AJ and Heather who are able to negotiate one-off contracts, that's very different than a commercial Pacific Source plan with an employer of only 100 people that have used it in the past and weren't able to get that authorization. So our experience might be very, very different than those who have used it in the past. Number two, you have to verify that you are comparing the coverage packages of ours versus those other ones. Because, for example, if someone who has Select Health through their work has a $5,000 deductible and a $5,000 individual deductible and a $10,000 deductible, because that's all they could purchase from their work because their work doesn't cover premiums, then they're probably going to have a very, very poor experience with Select Health that wouldn't be the experience of our employees at all. And so I just think we have to be very cautious when we ask about just generalized experiences to ensure that we're comparing apples to apples.
My thing would be, how was the billing, how was the experience there, not any of that other stuff.
That's I completely agree, and that's a fine
that's what I'm
question.
saying
But
is-
it's just
is-
important that you make sure that you compare those apples to apples and that people aren't saying, well, I hated the billing because I had to spend 10 times more than I did when I moved over to Blue Cross. But in reality, they were on a $10,000 deductible plan with Select
Sure.
Health and then a $5,000 deductible plan with Blue Cross. So those are the considerations that I think everyone should just keep in mind if they go about that route.
Okay. Nope, I think that's fair. Corey?
I like Josh's point about I agree that we should leave the budget as is with Blue Cross for now. But I do like the idea of seeing where the department heads would fall with the excess money if we did go with Pacific Source, because I'd like to see how we would navigate these funds, what projects would we spend these excess funds on, so that way we know, it gives us a full scope of what we're looking at a budget if we go with one of these less expensive avenues. But I do suggest that we do leave the budget as it is, because it's easier to drop that price than to raise it back up down the road.
My thought is, let's build the budget and leave the departments out of it. If there's a savings, then there's a savings to the city as a whole, and go from there. I don't imagine that there's enough money to really do a big project
Yeah.
if you split it up in different departments.
Mayor,
Is what my big thing is. And I think, did Brent have a thing, and then Rick?
and then me.
That's true.
Maybe.
And I think I'm okay leaving it at the higher rate. There's no harm in leaving it high and then going down.
Okay. All right, Rick?
On your quote sheet, there's increases indicated for the second year. Will those be contractual as we go into this, or are we going to see a change order a year from now?
No, that is contractual, like they would be bound by that. That's the beauty of it. You would know that you would be, with Select Health, you'd know you'd be no more than 10.9% of the rates that they offered us. And with Pacific Source, you'd be no more than 9.9%. So that even allows you to kind of plan your budget for 2 years to know that you're not going to be any higher than that. And that's the problem we struggle with every year. Is we don't get our renewal until April. We're negotiating, like in this case, through May and possibly even into June. And then you guys are trying to build a budget with those numbers. We now know and have a pretty solid number going into next year. So that decision is almost a 2-year decision, which I think makes it easier for everyone. And that's the same with Blue Cross as well, because they have a 15% cap. The cap's differently, but at least with all 3 options, we know what our ceiling is next year, which makes it a little easier.
Thank you.
So just kind of on a follow-up on that, it's contractual on their end. Is it a guarantee on our end that we have to have that, or will they come down, or do they have the option to come down if we
No,
ask?
if the experience is there, that's my job.
So,
That's-
yeah, our
Oh,
experience,
absolutely.
the miracle happens that you say won't, which you're probably right.
Mm-hmm.
But say it does and things change, they will, or they have the opportunity to come down.
Absolutely. So for example, the city of Idaho Falls had a 19.9% cap this year with Pacific Source, and the renewal ended up being 9.9%. So yeah, absolutely. If the experience is there, that's our job, is to negotiate that and fight that and get that down. Like, that is not what your rate will be. Like, if your experience warrants less, guaranteed, Heather and I will make sure that they give us less. That's our job, and we make sure that they do that.
Okay,
Mr. Mayor.
yes.
Just one other point I'd like to make when I'm looking at here, for example, by fund, the general fund has a savings of $200,000. And I don't feel comfortable going into having to make tax solution decisions with the Blue Cross number still on the books if that's not the one that we intend to go with, because then we're making decisions on cuts and where to allocate money when there could be a substantially different number because of the benefits and personnel. So my direction personally, if we were to go to an up-down vote on which direction to go, I would vote to build the budget with Pacific Source.
Okay. Has anybody changed their minds on any of that? We've got 4 of you anyway that have said leave it, and,
Point out, the difference is $410,000.
yeah.
What was that, Brent?
Difference is $410,000.
410?
Between Blue Cross and Pacific Source from high to low.
Oh, total. Total, yeah.
Yeah.
Savings.
Yeah. I was looking, mine was just the general fund.
Yeah, no, yeah, overall.
Yeah.
Okay. We still good with leaving it where it is? That's still, I understand what Josh is saying, but that's where I am too. So we'll leave the numbers where they are right now. Hopefully have an answer on July 11. And I would encourage the council to talk to some people and get to know, so that we aren't jumping into a problem like we have in the past. And I will mention Pacific Source has been good to respond to me as of late. Select Health and Blue Cross, all 3 of them have gotten right back to me, so I've been able to speak to all of them. But I would like to, I've got experience with Blue Cross. I'd like to visit with users of the other 2, and I'd recommend that you do it too. Josh does have a lot more experience because he's in the field. And so at a provider end of things, he's probably looking at it as a provider end of things. I'm more interested in as a user end of things also. So it's good to have both. So thank you for that. Thank you. Oh, yeah, you wanted to say
Unrelated to
something.
medical, if that helps.
Not really.
Yesterday, when we briefly went through raises for general employees and everyone not in a union, I mentioned that the fire numbers are kind of boggy. Normally, we wrap up negotiations far earlier than we did this year. We've had less than, honestly, 3 or 4 business days to do a final analysis of those numbers, and we did a complete overhaul of their pay plans. The fire budget might not be accurate this year because there just is simply not time at this point for us to have enough distance from it to look back at it with clarity. If we run into a mid-year problem with the fire budget, that is going to be because of how late negotiations ended. There is simply just not the time to take 100 people, destroy what they currently do, and rebuild everything with complete accuracy this fast to turn around. So I just want to put that caveat out there. We have spent a lot of hours working on that, but I cannot guarantee it is flawless this year.
Okay.
So potential looming problem, little or huge?
Well, are we talking, do you want to define what you mean by huge? I'm saying there could be a couple $100,000 difference in just something that we missed as we're trying to take out ad pays and adjust benefits. Their benefits are not through the personnel file. Those had to be manually adjusted in the operating lines. The chief and Jean and I have just not had time to sit down with the numbers we have in right now and do a very thorough scrub.
Okay.
We have scrubbed as far as we can at this point. I can have a better scrub done by July 11th. I just want to be very transparent that these numbers are not the sparkling beauty that you're used to seeing in the file.
That's exactly what I needed. Thank you.
Okay. All right, and I do actually have one insurance question that I've got to ask that's bothered me. I've asked before. I asked before, got an answer. We've got a thing here for 3. You've got Blue Cross Select Health and Pacific Source. Regents is a ugly miss. It's a miss. We're not seeing it here.
They did not.
Did they not submit anything? Are they not interested in Pocatello? Did they submit something? What happened?
I apologize, and I may misspeak here. I may be getting it confused with the City of Idaho Falls. I can't remember which one of you two. One of them they bid and they were super high on. The other one they refused to bid. And I'll be honest with you, I don't dare say because I don't remember which one that was. It was either really high or they chose not to. And Heather made a really good point in the last meeting. They do have a lot going on moving over to the state plan. And I think that's taken a lot of their time, energy, and resources to get that all set up and moving. So But yeah, I haven't seen them. I was looking forward to something like that, and they've usually been competitive, especially on the city of Idaho Falls. They've really tried to chase that one over the years, and I'm pretty sure they chose not to bid on you, and they were really high on the city of Idaho Falls, and they were actually even late on the city of Idaho Falls, if I remember correctly, too, or they were late on yours. One of them, they actually missed the deadline for the RFP, so I think they're just trying to scramble and get that other situation taken care of with the state.
Can you check on that and double check?
I can follow up with
and
that.
then
I'll get
let
that.
me know.
Yeah,
That-
absolutely,
That
yeah.
would be great.
Yeah,
I'm
not a problem.
a little concerned that they wouldn't even respond to an RFP.
Well,
so-
the Nationals
or an
actually
RFQ.
declined to quote you as well based on your experience, and then also their network contracts. But that's generally the way that goes. In all honesty, Aetna has made a run at you in the past, and Aetna actually reached out and said they were going to make a bid, and after reviewing your experience, they politely declined. So,
Fair enough. Okay.
Yep.
Oh, Rick?
Mr. Mayor, if Regions did in fact bid and were high, I'd still like to see the numbers.
okay, all right. If they did, I'll make sure I can get those for you. Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay,
All right. Thank you.
you're welcome. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
All right.
Anybody need a break?
Want a break or no? No, we're good.
Gene, need a break?
Gene, do you need a break?
Actually, if you don't mind, I do. Give me 2 minutes.
Okay. So we are going to take a break for a couple minutes.
Okay.
For joining us after our break. We'll go ahead and get started or continue the meeting. We're on fiscal year 25 budget presentation. Gene?
Thank you, Mayor. Gene Hill and Bonnie from the finance team, Honorable Council. Before we get started, again, kind of like yesterday, there's a question I'd like to answer before this question comes, just if I can. And that is, budgets are estimates, right? They're forecasts by each department. We pull them together to come up with a budget so that we can do zero, balancing it out. In the past, we've gotten comments about that. So I just wanted to clarify that. And again, the reason we do amendments, 3 or 4 of these a year, is to optimize the budget because we don't know when grants are coming, when they're not, so we have to adjust that. I just want to make that clarification. And with that, I get started. Are we okay with the community agency the way it is? Or do we need to discuss that anymore?
Brent?
You're talking about the community, including the donations to the community, the neighborhoods?
Yes.
I did have one thought on that. I really like the idea of helping to bring the communities together. And I'm wondering if perhaps in an adjunct to what we've already proposed, that we could propose some type of assistance with community cleanup, such as providing a limited number of free dumpsters to the neighborhoods throughout the years. They could put together a cleanup party perhaps. City of Pocatello would supply the dumpsters, again, a limited number. Might cost a little bit of money, but I think it'd be money well spent. It could help with code enforcement. It could help with the council goals of community beautification. So I think everybody, and it could also help bring the neighborhoods together.
That's a good idea. Thoughts? Hayden?
Yeah, I agree with you, Brent.
Think that's a good idea. Corey?
I like that idea, but I think we have something in place, do we not, where we do like a free dumpster?
So we have a community partners thing with the free dumpster. This would be in addition to
In
that.
addition to it, okay.
So that program is a great program, well-used program. You have to be right on it in January. And if you're not on it in January, by February, it's used up. Dumpsters are spoken for and stuff. And I think, if I understand, Brent is talking about the neighborhood organization having a meeting, forming a week or whatever of cleanup for the neighborhood and pulling, or maybe it's a day, but pulling them together and scheduling and then working with us to get a dumpster or two.
Correct. Yeah,
Maybe
correct.
3, depending on where they are.
I like it.
I think the cost could be low and the benefits could be significant.
Yeah, I like it.
I think it's a good idea.
Okay, Rick?
But I don't think what Gene's talking about, what Brent's talking about, that isn't going to affect what's on the screen up there right
No.
now.
Well,
Those are totally separate issues.
I think those are the, yes,
Can
you're
I
right.
ask one for clarification?
Yeah.
If it's part of it, would it be part of like the neighborhood, that 25 grand or 12.5?
yeah,
that you set
that's
aside?
why I brought it up, as I was
That's why I
saying it
just
in an
wanted to get
adjunct to that.
clarification if that money was.
So-
coming
Thinking
from
of
that budget.
adding to that amount,
Well,
or,
perhaps. I don't know whether we would address it in the budget now and add some dumpster cost to that number or work this out some other way, but that's
why don't
why I brought
we-
it up now.
Why don't we, and council, this is obviously your choice, but I'm thinking, why don't we leave the 12.5 as it is for the neighborhoods and encourage them to do a cleanup and talk to us and let them at least do a report to us. Written would be fine in my mind, of when and how they would do the cleanup and also how they would spend this 12.5. Does that make any sense?
I'm not sure I'm clear.
So I think it's prudent. I think I do like this idea, but I think it would be prudent to say, look, we've got this 12.5. In addition to this, we want you to pull the community, your neighborhood together in a cleanup effort to clean up our community, our city. And so we'll provide dumpsters. We're also providing you $2,500 for a party, but we would like you to do both.
So are we, is this a stipulation of the 12.5?
Well, I don't know. That would be
Almost
up
what
to
it sounds like is a stipulation of
the
12.5.
council. I don't know. Maybe it
I
is,
would
maybe
want
it
this to
isn't.
be an addition, not as
Yeah.
part of the 2,500 that they're gonna
Sure.
get.
Rick
Well,
and then Josh.
this line item, number 12, it's on the screen, only deals with the NeighborWorks 6 neighborhoods.
Yes.
Five
Five.
specifically funded here, and I think the kind of program you're talking about would need to be something coordinated through sanitation and offer it to neighborhoods throughout the entire city, because it isn't just College neighborhood that needs cleaned up.
So the easiest, I guess why we're looking at it this way, and I agree 100% with what you're saying, but we only have 6 organized neighborhood associations.
Well, that are
If we have a
recognized by
neighbor-
NeighborWorks. There
if-
are other neighborhood associations. They just aren't LMI, and they're not part of NeighborWorks.
Well, if they are organized and they have a thing, then I think they would be, I don't think I would limit this to the 6 if there are other neighborhoods that are functioning and that have a board, if you will, that do this. My concern would be Rick and Brian and Linda and Brent get together and, hey, let's have a neighborhood cleanup in our yard. And so we call and we say, hey, it's a neighborhood cleanup, and we set the dumpster in between all 4 of our houses, and we call it the neighborhood cleanup when we don't have a neighborhood association organized.
And there, I think, lies the problem with what we're trying to do with this whole program.
I don't think that's a problem at all with this program. I think that if there's a neighborhood that's working and organized and they would like to do this, we need to know about them. I don't know of any other neighborhoods organized and put together than the 6 that we've talked about. Maybe they're out there, I just don't know about that.
But I think we know about them because they are LMI neighborhoods.
Maybe that's why we
And
know
they're
about these.
recognized through NeighborWorks. But when you drift out of those areas, I don't think there's any
So I would- then I would put a
organization.
call out this year, if you are organized, to let us know. That's what I would do. If they're interested in this, let us know that they're organized and what they're doing. Because they haven't yet. And maybe it's because they're LMI. We don't care if they're LMI or not. Let us know. That's what I would say. But I like the dumpsters.
Mr. Mayor, what are the criteria for the community empowerment program? That
Tom, come on up here and explain.
Is that what it was called? Did I call
No,
it-
it's called Partners in Pride, I think. is
Partners in
what
Pride,
it's-
yeah,
what it's
that one.
called. And I think the criteria is you have an address in the city of Pocatello and you sign up for it in January.
Tom Kirkman, Director of Public Services. So over the years, Partners in Pride is what it's called. We have a handful of 3-yard containers, a couple of roll-off 17 yards. We had to make some changes to Partners in Pride. There was a couple of loopholes that were getting exploited. So you would have a person with multiple properties that would pretty much take all the dumpsters for a large portion of the time. So we've had to restrict it to a property owner once a year. So if you have 12 properties, that doesn't mean you get 12 containers at 2 different times. Because what was ended up happening is we had, 5 or 6 property owners that were taking all of them for the whole year. And so the criteria right now is if you have a utility bill account, you can have 1 a year of your choosing.
I love Brent's idea. I think the easiest way to do it, and if sanitation needs an extra, because what's the cost of a 17-yard container for a weekend?
About $300.
If we give sanitation an extra $2,500 in their budget for community or neighborhood cleanup, and then require and have sanitation just have them submit a list of here's the neighborhood, here is the area that we'll be targeting, here is a volunteer list that we've collected for our community cleanup day, here's the date we'd like it, and allow for neighborhood cleanup, make it just a separate but similar Partners in Pride, make it specifically for neighborhood cleanups. And if, for example, you submit, and maybe we need to require that it covers a certain amount of area in order to qualify. And so if you submit and you've only got 4 neighbors, it doesn't meet the area criteria. Once an area submits for one, that's the one they get that year, and that's it. They get 1 per year, and there's no overlapping. You don't get to come in and ask it for a second if it is in it. We need to create a couple criteria with it. But I think that just let sanitation run it as a separate program.
I think I like that idea if sanitation can do that, but I think it needs to be limited to organized
Fine by me.
neighborhoods.
Yeah, organized neighborhood associations.
Yeah.
And
I would, if I could, Mayor, I would agree with that because we don't want it to get taken advantage of.
absolutely.
Somebody will eventually if they can, and so it needs to have something like that. Yes.
I like the suggestion of how to organize it, but I believe you said like 3 or 4 times a year. Now we're talking once a year. So I just want to make sure
We're starting this right now. Let's start with once a
okay,
year, see
once
how
a
it
year.
goes.
Okay.
And a program of
I just
sanitation.
wanted to clarify, but I'm good with that.
Okay, Brent?
1 dumpster per neighborhood per year.
That requests it.
Is it one dumpster? If we have a neighborhood that has
One
7
roll-off.
blocks,
One roll-off.
Well, one 17-yard roll-off, you can do a lot of cleanup
Okay.
with that.
So we have 30
7
yards too, that we could potentially, where it's once a year, they could get.
Once a year, a 30-yard?
The tough part we found with the 30 yards is they're so tall, it's hard to throw things over.
Yeah.
Got it.
So we do the 17s, which are the low sides.
okay.
But we
And-
can do
It
whatever.
could be as the neighborhood requests, whether they want a 3-yard, a 17, or a 30.
And I would be fine letting, sanitation writing in, okay, we'll give you, for the community cleanup project, once per year, we'll give you 1 17-yard and 2 4-yards at the outskirts of that neighborhood.
We good?
But yeah, housing sanitation.
Do we need to put something if we do?
No, I don't think
some
we
money
need to. We'll
towards
just, can you figure that out? Let's let sanitation figure it out.
So we're leaving our 12.5.
The 12.5 stays the same. This all stays the same. Sanitation will figure out that criteria and that stuff for us so that we know we can watch it and see what happens this year. Hopefully, we have more neighborhoods. I would love it if we have more organized. I just don't know about them. And if you do, let me know and I'll reach out to them. So, okay. All right. Yes, we're leaving it.
Council. Okay, so if I can, I need to clarify, I think explain the spreadsheet so it's a little easier for people to understand. I think that'll help. So, columns A through E basically are the description and the fund number. Straightforward? Okay. Column F are the revenues by fund, so all the way down, right? I mean, it's basically the revenues. H, expenditures or expenses. I is a, because we're using live data, right, is a place to manipulate it. So if I zero this out, what that does is it produces in column L, the overage or the underage. And so it allows me to manipulate adding the over 3% or the CapEx. So if I add, just if I put a 1 in, it brings up just the 3% over. If I put a 2 in there, it just brings up CapEx. And then if I put a 3 in there, it does both the CapEx and everything. Questions? Is this helpful?
Oh, we got a question.
So your very top line there, you have revenue, 44 million, 572, expenditures, 422. Where does it show the difference? Like how far we're above and beyond?
So if I zero this out, line L, that tells you whether you're short or there. So based on, with no CapEx,
Okay.
no over 3% in line L, so right here, right, this area right here, it says we have 150K over.
Okay,
So revenues exceed expenditures by $150,000.
got it.
Then when I put in the 1 to cover the 3%, for animal shelter, to cover the outside vet,
Got it.
at that point in time, it comes back and says, oh, we have 40,000 left that we can spend. And then if I put in 3, that includes the CapEx and everything, and we can see it's 0.
And zeroed out.
Okay.
And that's what we have in front of us here.
Yes.
Is it
Yes.
everything?
I kind of gave you the final calculation I thought, but I just thought it would be worthwhile walking through this. Again, if it's not useful, let me know, but I think it is useful, so.
So sort of the bottom line on this spreadsheet is with this, can you roll back up to the top again, please?
I thought you meant the bottom.
No, I'm sorry. So this spreadsheet is zeroed out. Can you keep all the way to the top, please? Yeah.
So this is just for the general fund.
Right, I understand.
Okay, so yeah, that's zeroed out. So based on what I was going to present today, it's revenues and expenditures, 3% and over in CapEx, 0 out to where there's,
And that includes the 110,000 at the animal shelter and the 40 for the parks.
Yes.
That gets us up to the
Yes.
zero. Okay,
okay,
got it, thank you.
I want to be clear too, this includes wages and benefits.
yes, it includes
Okay.
all expenditures. Okay, then going over to column O, this is in the case of, I'll find one ongoing, but what it is this is if we have to reduce, it's a reduction, somebody has to cut, right? There's too much, they have to cut. This allows us to assign that amount that they have to go back and cut in this column. In column Q, this gives us kind of what the excess reserves are, and I can pull that up. If I, for example, if I come down here to street, I'll pick on street for just a second. If I put in 1, it brings up what their excess reserves are. But it shows that we still have $1 million shortage, right? And so if I put in, and that means that you'd have to type in some way that Tom would have to reduce his budget another $1 million to get that to balance. If I put in 2, you'll see that the excess reserves went down by $1 million. That's to cover that capital X that Tom wants to spend in streets.
And that's why N is zeroed out.
Yes. And then you'll see at the very end, yeah, it zeroes out. And the idea is we want this column to be 0. That's the idea. This column should be 0 all the way down. And there's a few areas where we're going to have to talk about that. But if that's helps, then I'd like to get started if there are no other questions.
Questions? Okay, we're good.
Okay, So changes we've made since Tuesday is we have moved up from recreation into parks, the Greenway. So I added 40,000 here, which was taken, I took out of Fund 4 and moved it up here. I'm gonna go to the notes too, so you can just quickly see this. We increased the non-departmental because in talking to Skylar, they need a $100,000 match. We usually put that into the non-departmental. So I decreased the,
Which Skylar are we talking about?
That's a
BB?
transit.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
I didn't know there was more than one Skylar.
Depends on which one shows up and what day.
Which one shows up? All right. So with that, with those changes, we basically have used up all of this surplus, if you will, or the overage in Fund 1, or in the general fund. And I think we've covered all of the requests from Tuesday. Then, again, talking with Street, we wanted to do the 500,000 for additional equipment, 500,000 for additional paving. That $1 million, again, is coming out of his excess reserves. Still leaves a balance of 3 million, and you can see that noted by 2. Recreation, we talked about, covering those top priorities that the executive team had decided we should, or wanted to do and requested we do. So that gives Ann with 194,000. That's covered out of her excess. Leaves her $122,000 in excess reserves. Please interrupt me if I'm going too fast. Cemetery, we talked about how we were going to add out of the general fund. We took the 33,000, we added it to cover that shortfall. So that's taken care of. Airport, again, they were 36,000 short. And we added 100,000 to cover because they needed that, to put money away for their deferred maintenance, the things that need to be taken care of. One was their HVAC, I always get it wrong, HVAC, right?
Yes.
Okay, which was like $12,000, and then tires and different things that Alan and Christie said they need. So that takes care of that one. The one we need to talk about is library. Because again, the idea is we need to make sure that each of the funds can operate with their budget, right? Not because we can't continue to do this forever. It has to be sustainable. And so the question is, I sent you out the spreadsheet on their expenses, and Trina's here, which she should probably come up just to make sure she can. Thank you, Trina. So I don't think it's fair to just totally push it on to them and say, fix your budget today, because they didn't know about it because of the increases and things like that. So I would ask that we tap into the excess reserves, take care of it this year, and have them next year, gives them a chance to fix it.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
And I don't know, maybe Trina can speak to that, but I was looking at their budget last night, and I've been the library liaison for 6 years and studied their budget very closely. And everyone knows I'm like one of the biggest supporters of libraries in general and advocate for our library. And I see a fundamental problem with what you're suggesting. Libraries provide service, and service is provided by people. So the budget, the biggest expense in the budget is personnel and personnel costs, benefit costs. Those are going up substantially every year. The library is down, they're short-staffed, they're spread very thin, they're down a position. And so I don't see those costs going down. So the idea that we would sort of temporarily fix it with excess reserves this year and then expect them to fix it in the future. I've had long discussions with our library director about this, is what is the fix? Because those costs are only going up. So how do you fix it in future years? And I'm reluctant to spend to use excess reserves as a sort of temporary fix to a problem that is actually only going to get worse. And I don't see any solution in terms of there's no fat in the budget to cut. They're already as low as they can possibly be or as lean as they can be on personnel. So how do you do that? The only way would be to cut services or to cut hours, but then we're not providing the service that our community wants. We've seen recently how much our community values our library. When that's been under attack, we've seen people come out in droves to support it. So we know they want it. And so I think if we suggest, well, the only way we can, balance that budget or make it work is to cut service, or, cut people, and that's the way you cut service, I don't think that's what our community wants. And it wouldn't be comparable to any other library in a community our size. I think we're already down service-wise from where we were pre-COVID, and so I don't want to see us go any lower. So to me, and I don't like to say this, but I think the only real answer, I think using excess reserves is a temporary solution that doesn't solve it. I think this needs to be an increased tax ask. If the community wants the library, then we need to pay for it.
So Gene, I have a question. The library is its own taxing district or entity. The levy rate, where are they at?
0.001, and we have already maxed that out. I max it out every year.
So we have taxed as much as we can for the library, in the library thing. So we would be supplementing more than the taxable amount allowed for the library.
Yes.
Okay. Brent?
I'd like to follow up on the mayor's line of thought there. So library gets its own levy, and we can only statutorily increase that by some certain percentage, right?
Correct.
What is that percentage?
0.001%. I may have 1 0 off. It's either 0.01 or it's 0.001.
I think
So, you're talking 1%?
zero,
or
zero.
It's not 1%.
It's not even
No,
1%, it's
so percentage.
0.00%.
So we're talking percentage, not, so it's, if you kick it, the percentage, right, you kick it over 2 decimals, right?
So-
So it's percent,
Right.
0.001, or it's 0.01. I think it's 0.001 though. Pretty sure that's what it is.
So when we're talking about, increasing some of the other expenditures by 3%, the levy rate increase isn't even 1%.
No.
Is that right? Is that part of the problem? That,
Well, I think fundamentally, if I can, and this has to do with every fund, not just all personnel. If you can visualize, a histogram, if you will, or a graph that shows 100%, and you were to do this over 10 years, and you were to take personnel costs, operational costs, you'll see that personnel costs just continue to eat away at the operational costs. And that's the fundamental problem, we have to do things to make that work, because we're held to, unless you want to do the foregone, we're held to the 3% max on the tax. And we know that personnel costs have gone up, easily exceeded that 3%. So we have to try to get each fund to balance within its tax levy.
Okay.
so
Sorry.
I'm trying to get a handle on the current problem and the future problem. So the library gets a certain levy, but they can statutorily only raise it less than 1% at the same time that all the other costs are going up. Isn't that a fundamental problem of this cap?
Absolutely.
And that it's only going to get worse?
Right.
That we have inflation at 3+%. Sure, we can have a statutory cap at 3% overall, but that's limited to less than 1% for the library. Is that right?
That's correct.
So this problem isn't going to get better. It's probably only going to get worse so long as we have a cap on, or the library has a cap on the amount of its levy.
Correct.
So Linda has something, but I just want to throw this out there so that it doesn't get lost. I don't think there's a person on the council right now that does not support the library wholeheartedly. And I think that's been shown in the past where we've been very solidly in support of the library. And so when we're talking about cutting or adding to or any of that stuff, I just want everybody to recognize that I don't know one member of the council up here who is not 100% in support of the library. And so that, I just want to make sure I throw that out there before we go much
Yeah.
further. And then
And I
Linda, you
appreciate
have.
you saying that, because I mean, I was speaking for myself, but I know everybody up here supports the library too. And so, Brent makes the point, and you're saying this too, that there is a fundamental problem here. And that's why I have, like, using excess reserves, yes, we can do that this year, but it doesn't solve that problem. And the problem is only going to get worse each year. I did want to just put out one statistic here that I think kind of illustrates this problem is the 96,000, it's almost 97,000 shortfall is actually a third of the operational budget for the library. This isn't a small amount to just, we'll make this up going forward. If you look at their total budget, it's a small percentage of their total budget. But if you look at the operational budget of the library, it's a third of it. I mean, it's not a third, it's 30% roughly of that budget. So that's a big issue to overcome. And again, going forward, I don't want us to just make a quick fix this year and not really look at this structural problem. But at the same time, I don't know that any of us have the perfect solution of how to solve this going forward.
So if I can, Linda, Mayor, sorry. I think that's why I'm trying to buy time, right? Is if we can fill the gap using excess reserves this year, it gives us time to figure out gives Eric time to figure, and Trina how to figure it. I mean, gives us all time to figure out how to come up with the best solution so that we maximize services and stuff for the community. And not easy,
Yeah.
There's nothing easy here.
So I've got Councilmember Mansfield and Councilmember Nichols. And it's been a while since we've done that.
Been a while.
It has.
And then I've got
I don't think we've had a
Councilmember
meeting in
Paulson.
2 weeks. So you're right. It's been about 2 weeks.
No, it's been longer than that. So I've got Mansfield, Nichols, Paulson, and then Cheatham.
Gene, that 0.001% number, what does that number represent? A percent of what?
So the total tax value
Yep.
is just, I'm gonna round it up, but it's $33 million, right?
Okay.
Every year, when we ask for an increase of that 3% that I talked about, it's based on that $33 million. That is the highest of the previous 3 years. And so every one of these individual levy groups, when they hit their max, it's based on that 33 million. So the 0.001 is the percentage of that 33 million, which allows us to increase the budget for the library.
Which means this, so it is a very small slice of the pie, but it does still go up by the 3% of the total tax base.
No,
Okay, why not?
library does not go up by 3%.
The actual value, because this 0.001% does not change, right? That is the percentage of the pie that library gets.
Correct.
Correct?
Correct.
The percentage does not change.
No,
Every year, the library gets 0.001% of the pie.
correct.
But when the entirety of the pie goes up by 3% every year, the library slice would also go up by 3%.
Exactly.
Okay. So the problem then is not necessarily that the library is asking for 3% increases. It's that personnel costs, and as you pointed to the fund, personnel costs are outpacing the 3% limit that we have. correct?
For the citywide.
For the citywide, yes.
Absolutely.
Library included.
Absolutely.
So the problem is not, because I worry that the 3% and the 0.001%, we're getting falsely equated here as to what those represent. We every year by state statute can increase the pie by 3%. The problem is that personnel costs citywide increase at a rate at faster than 3%. And that's what the library is, or has in the past. Who knows what it'll do in the future, probably. And that's what we are trying to battle. And you're asking for 1 year of excess reserves so that we can then create a long-term plan as to how the library can operate within their slice of the pie.
Yes.
Brent, and then Hayden.
Yeah, Judge, thanks for highlighting that because I'm still confused here. Does this budget can the library raise its revenue by 3%?
No.
Its revenue can go up 1% per statute on the, within their budget.
Wait, how can it not go up through?
So we have two, so we have a number of things that we have to balance. Just because you can take 3%,
Yeah.
if your numbers are maxed out and that 3% comes in above that, you still cannot exceed that statutorily levy amount that they give you. So you can't exceed that. And so when we look at all of our funds, and that's a important question that I ask Gene every year, every CFO, I ask, where are our levy maxes? And we are maxed at all of the levy maxes with what we're taking this year.
So we can't get to the 3%.
So
If we're max.
if the 3% maxes us. And so you can't take more. For example, airport is maxed. We cannot take more for the airport.
So
Library is maxed. We can't take more for the library and put the library under that levied amount. You can take and substitute money from another group, taxing group, to help fund that, but you have a max levy rate that you can take for each one. But as a whole, we could take 3%. We have the option for 3% once everything is added in. Everything increases a little bit because you have new construction every year. You have valuations that are readjusted every year, and the valuations of houses never go down. We've all experienced that they go up, but they do not drop.
got it.
And if they do drop, there's probably a problem.
Okay.
But so that's where those numbers move a little bit every year, but we can't levy more than what that levy rate is for them. I don't know how to explain it very well, but that's
No,
the way it
Levy
is.
rate not.
So,
Yes.
or if we talk in absolute dollars, right? So on that 33 million, 3% of that is approximately 993,
I don't know why you said approximately. We know exactly what it is.
072, right? That is the total that we can levy. That's the total dollar amount. Then if you go to the general fund, the max the general fund can take is 0.009%, and that's like 268,000. That takes away from that absolute dollar, right? And then if we go down to the only two that are unlimited, but they're still held to this 3% max, liability and street are the only two that don't have a max on their individual levy. But you come down to cemetery, it's like 0.0004. You go to airport, it's 0.0006. And each one of those in absolute dollars, we're at that max, that 993,000.
Okay, does that help? And Brent and then Hayden.
Sorry to keep pounding on
No,
the same
no.
thing here, but the library is not able to raise its revenue by 3%.
No,
The tax rate.
by the tax revenue.
Right.
Now, they could go get donations. they
No,
could go get
just on the tax side of it.
Tax levy,
So we have a 3% overall cap.
Correct.
But the library is limited to significantly less than that.
yes, 0.0001%.
So far less than 1%.
Oh, yeah. If you looked at it, not percentage, right? it would be 0.000001.
Right.
Okay, Hayden, and then Rick, and then Linda.
The interfund activities went up like roughly 17,000. I was just wondering what that is from 23 to 24.
I'm sorry, one more time.
The interfund activities in the expenditures from 23 to 24, it looks like it went up roughly 17,000. I'm just wondering what that might be.
Let me just pull that up if that's all right, so we can all be on the same sheet here. So if you look at,
Well, and then, yeah, 24 to 25 as well. Like, what
Right.
is that used for?
so basically the increase on the expenditure side, right? Do my math here. You guys are gonna hate my math, right? I can actually see with this big screen though. So their total expenditures, right? From fiscal year 25 to fiscal year 24, you can see is $100,000 that went up. On the revenue side, or I'm sorry, did I?
No, what he's asking is the interfund
Oh.
activities, the interfund transfer went up 17,000.
I'm sorry, I totally missed that.
And then projected, well, looks like 20-ish, 23.
Yeah.
So the interfund went up 23.
And I guess why? What is that used for with the library?
So this goes back to Tuesday, right? So interfunds, right? Simplistically, I'll pick on IT again, right? He gets a phone bill of $100,000 per month for a phone bill.
Okay.
Every department has X number of phones.
Okay, I remember this now. Thank you.
So that is what the interfunds are. And his costs have gone up dramatically, like everybody else's costs have gone up. And so, again, the only way we can do this is to basically do a standard way of we allocate these costs. And it includes legal, HR, finance, fleet,
IT.
and that's allocated out. And that's, again, we're still working on trying to find the most efficient way to do this, but we're nailing it down. And that's why stuff went up dramatically. And believe me, I hear from all the department heads, why is my interfund up $2 billion? But it's inflation.
Nobody's interfund's up $2 billion.
No, I know. But I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Okay.
Rick, and then Linda.
Mr. Mayor, I think there's some confusion over here between the difference in what House Bill 389 did between levy rate and increases in budgets. The levy rate is 0.001. That doesn't affect what the budget can be set at until you levy at that. As the value of the taxing district increases, the budget can increase because we have more potential revenue coming from an increased value of the city. So, it's like the 488 acres we just annexed. We won't see that revenue for 2 years, but that increased value will increase the potential budget of libraries, even if they still tax at the same levy rate. And we do get a 3% increase in budget each year as long as you don't exceed that levy rate.
Yes.
And I think there's some confusion over those numbers
Rick,
and how they affect the budget.
Can I make one thing though too? Even if property values were to go up 100%, right? We're still capped at the maximum of the past 3 years, 3% on the last three. So we don't see that
3%
value
more.
increase until future days,
Right.
future years.
That's why it will take at least 2 years to see that.
Yes.
Well,
value.
that money, we won't even, that 488 acres, they've already been assessed.
Yeah.
They'll be paying taxes into the county. We won't see any of that in the next tax year. But after that, when the new valuations come out next summer, then those taxes will begin to be paid and we'll see revenue from those in '26.
That's right.
But the city has increased in value.
Yes.
And, whether you look at residential or commercial, industrial, whatever the various taxing categories are, and Mine went down a little bit this year, surprisingly. But it means that, again, as Gene said, you look at that 3 years, so the total amount of money available to the library has increased. But the 389 talks about maintenance and operations, and it was a disastrous bill that needs to be repealed, but it'll never happen. But there is some increased money available to the library. The problem is the cost of operating the library is increasing at a faster rate than what we are allowed to levy and produce that income at that fixed rate that we're allowed to charge for a library. But I share a similar concern that Linda expressed. The excess reserves you're talking about transferring to pay for that, Gene, are those library excess funds, or are they coming from somewhere else?
No, they're library excess reserves.
Where did those excess funds come from?
That is money that they have not spent previous years that are then rolled over into their into their reserve fund. And that, so we do have that, again, we set aside 25% to cover emergencies, 3 months, 2 months worth of operations. So that excess reserve is after that deduction.
Is most of that then, like other departments, coming from salary savings, from people leaving, not being immediately replaced?
It could be from salary or operational that rolls over into that.
And I look at the library budget, and not trying to be down on libraries here, but it looks like there's about $30,000 or $40,000 that could come out of that budget and would still maintain library services.
Well, I think that, I do like, and we'll get to Linda and then Corey, I do like the idea of spending their excess reserves. It's excess reserves, spending that down. And it does give you a year to work on it, to look at it, to see what happens. And maybe it does buy enough time to get taxes on the rolls the way that you see it, and maybe we do some stuff. So I've got Linda, Corey, and then Josh, and then Hayden.
I want to just focus on a few things, sort of where the library's at. For one thing, the budget has been, and I disagree with the idea that there's 30 or 40,000. I think there is just no fat in this budget, or that maybe isn't the right word to use, but I don't see abilities to cut without really hurting service. But they've kept their budget pretty flat over the years, but that means cuts. So it means every year you're doing more, or you're doing the same. No, you're doing less with the same amount. If you keep it flat, then you can do less. Their materials budget, they've been cutting that. The problem there is people are requesting more and more electronic materials, and you would think that electronic materials would be more efficient and they'd be less expensive. They're not. They're more expensive. So the more people want electronic materials, the more the materials cost rises. And yet they've actually been cutting it each year. And so we're getting less and less stuff in our library. When people are using it, the numbers show that usage is really high. We're in the 80% range for library cards in our community, which is really high compared to other cities. So we see the interest, but we're able to provide less to people. The other thing is program costs are actually down, and that's because we've had some major donors who've provided money to the STEAM room and all the activities related to that. But you can't budget for that. You don't know if you're going to get that from year to year, so that's something you can't count on. The Hayden brought up the interfund budget, and that's going up for everybody. The library has to pay their share, but that's 40% right now of their non-personnel budget. So that's a huge amount. And one of the things that Eric and I talked about is if you cut operations, the only way that they can really do that any more than they already have is to get it into deferred maintenance. This council has worked really hard to address that deferred maintenance issue and sort of get back on track with addressing maintenance issues. So I hate to get into that trap of, starting to kick that down the road again. So these are just some of the problems that they're facing of where the budget is. And I think you put it in a nutshell when you said that, and I can't remember who said it, but that the revenue for the library, although it's increasing, operational costs are going up at a faster pace than any revenue increases are. So that's the issue we have to address. If the way to do that is to buy time this year and then address it, maybe that's what we have to do. But I think that's a real conundrum of how we address that problem.
Okay, Corey, Josh, and Hayden.
So we want to take the 97,000 from excess reserves to fund and bring it to zero. And currently they have approximately 190,000 in excess reserves available, correct?
Correct.
How much do we put towards excess reserves every year?
So that's a fund by fund thing. So so Corey, if you will, for library, they've been very frugal, right? Over 2 or 3 years. So they had excess, whether it's personnel costs or whether it's operation, that rolls into the reserve. And again, we're trying to keep our reserves at 25%. Anything over that, we want to, use to help vitalize the city and do the deferred maintenance and things like that. So that's how you get the reserves.
So, I see that we have an issue, right? We have this 97,000 that we got to take care of. I think that it would be in our best interest and the best interest of the library to take those excess reserves to balance their budget. However, though, we did have Trina come up from out of the crowd here, the crowd, to the table to present or to speak on behalf of the library. And I would love to hear your opinion on where the library is at, because you're there, and how things are functioning. Obviously, you're not Eric, but I'd love to understand what is the idea behind we come to rescue with the excess reserves. What do we do next year? How do we affect this positively next year to where we're not in this same situation? You're not a fortune teller. I don't assume, right? Unless you went to school to tell fortunes. You might not be a fortune teller, but there are some practical steps on things that you guys are probably talking about, or maybe have some ideas on things you guys can do next year or in this next coming year to boost us so we don't have to do this again. Could you speak to that?
I can certainly try. I'm Trina Bondman. I'm the Associate Director at the Marshall Public Library. And I know Linda pointed out that when you look at our overall budget, 97,000 looks like a small number. But if we're not touching any of our personnel budget and we're not touching any of our interfund charges, then our operating budget outside of that is just over 311,000. So we'd be looking at taking 97 out of that 300,000. So that is a pretty significant cut. We also have managed to keep that budget pretty flat. And again, as Linda said, we spend more money on everything with the same amount of money. And speaking to our material budget, our book budget right now is right around 152,000. And that is half, again, of the 300,000. And we spend out that book budget almost to the penny every year. We really, really try. We spend throughout the year at a steady pace. And if there's money left, we will go on a spending spree in that month of September to make sure we're providing as many materials as we can for the people of Pocatello, because that's what that money is for. So as far as using the excess reserves this year, I know we have them there, so that's great. I just don't know looking forward. We would be able to kind of nickel and dime, we'd be able to cut a little bit here and a little bit there. But I just don't know how we're going to be able to solve this much without cutting, either what we're able to provide programming-wise, material-wise, or cutting services, because if you look into where all of our money is, it's in our personnel. That's more than half of our budget right there.
So follow up. I think that we should do this for the benefit of the library and for the benefit of the citizens of Pocatello, that they would have the services that are adequate. It's hard to do just as much as you've been doing for the past several years on less than what's allotted and what's available. And so since we do have it in excess reserves, I think we should do that. But I think that we should also hear from Eric at some point on what his future plans are or future goals are to keep the library from being in this predicament again.
Sure. Josh and then Hayden.
Couple of things. One, fund difference for library does find an additional $12,000 between Blue Cross and Pacific Source. This is built with Pacific Source. That would reduce it by about $12,000 if we go with Pacific Source. That would create a little bit of that. Doesn't do the full 96, but does make it a little bit better. Number two, I think the extra savings and the prudent budgeting of future years really means that they should, I agree that we should give it for the excess reserves for a year and just make it whole for this year. And while I think that at times there can be, I think that this budget increases and in ways that with salaries and benefits, it's hard to project for anybody, and let alone how that's, how the rates are going to affect an increase. And so I don't say this as I think it can be seen as a condemnation at times or a fault, and I don't want to assign fault to anybody. But after this year, I do think we need to have a strategic steps about how we're going to right size to stay within the levy ability of the library. So support it this year, right size for next year.
Okay. Hayden.
Yeah, I think I agree with everyone. I'm of the opinion this isn't Amazon or Barnes and Noble. It's a public service. I think we need to keep it going, but with an emphasis on this coming year, 2 years, whatever, figuring out how to, I guess, get that up to zero.
Okay, Brent.
I as well support using the excess reserves this year. I'm still trying to get a handle on why we're in this situation, what caused it, which is going to help us figure out what to do about it in the future is the reason I bring that up. So last year, was the library able to operate within its levy budget? Because I don't remember this problem last year. Okay, so what changed between last year and this year that caused this 90?
Inflation. Again, you have basically, if you will, I'll speak in real terms, but I want to start in nominal terms to start with, right? So if you looked at their revenues, they're only able to go kind of really flat, right? Just a little bit. But your expenses are going like this, because of, the CPI is 3.24, whatever. Our wages just went up 3%. Our healthcare is up 15%. It's a fundamental problem that we're going to have to deal with citywide, not just the library, right? We're going to have to face this over time. We've got to fix this.
But it's particularly severe with the library because of this limited amount that they can increase the levy. Is that right?
Exactly.
That's a fundamental problem we
Can't increase the revenues as fast as expenses go up.
Right. Got it. Thank you.
Okay, so I've got at least 4 that says use the fund balance or the excess reserves to cover this $96,827. We will have Eric and Trina work on a plan to help us balance this and figure this issue out as much as we can throughout the year. So,
Mr. Mayor?
yes.
I just wanted to say one last thing. I mean, I am obviously not going to vote against using the excess reserves, but I just will state again that this is a problem that isn't going to fix. So it is temporary. We all understand that. But I also want to be really clear that this isn't, and Josh, you were saying this kind of, it's not about fault or mismanagement or doing anything wrong. There's a fundamental problem here of rising costs that are just outpacing the increases that we're allowed to do. And so that's the problem. And the library is hit particularly hard by it right now. And especially the personnel costs and the benefit costs, those are just really high. So I think it's going to be difficult to solve this problem, but we're going to have to come up with.
We'll get it figured out.
plan.
But I think we have a plan moving forward. Rick?
Well, and I think we need to make a note, this isn't just libraries, and it
Yeah.
isn't just Pocatello. The IC meetings last week,
Yeah.
a couple of the groups that I was in, this is a problem, this 3% cap and the limits on annexation, the limits on what happens with urban renewal districts, the limits that the legislature has put on municipalities in being able to provide the services that the communities demand, it's a problem. And it affects every department sitting out here that has a general tax obligation is where the funding's coming from. The only exemptions are special funds, and this is a problem. And it's way bigger, and the smaller the community is, the worse this problem is.
Absolutely.
Those tiny towns are literally having to cut people. There are 4 or 5 people who work for them, and they're cutting their staff by 25%. I certainly hope we never reach that point in Pocatello, but it means pinching every penny. And I was a little distressed to hear that you make a mad dash to spend all the money in September. That smacks to me of the way the federal government works at the end of their fiscal year, and I don't mean to be critical, but I don't like to hear that. If we don't need to spend the money, we shouldn't be spending it, and that goes for every department in this city that's general tax obligation.
So, and I think that's very well said. This is, the reason the library pops up is because they've got that cap. Everything else, I mean, we're taking 3%, and that's how everybody else is fitting, but there's no limit anywhere else for us to take, and that's where we have run into an issue, and Rick's absolutely right when it comes to what the legislature's done for cities, municipalities, and I got to tell you, I don't know how the cities like Inca, McCammon, America Falls, Clayton, they've got one person and that's it. But I don't know how they do it. So it's definitely worse in a smaller city than it is where we are right now. So, but right now it looks like we'll do that, and then let's move on.
Okay. Thank you, council. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Trina. So just other changes since Tuesday. We, on line 47, try and lighten it up a little bit. It's now the Arts Council, not just the Chief Theater, right, for clarification. Just a title change. Maybe I shouldn't be so lighthearted. I need to back up, sorry. Transit, after talking with Skylar Beebe, we balanced that out, got that corrected, and again, that's where that 100,000 that we'll need for matching for his buses and things he's done. So that's done, and I think and the only other one was Fund 71. There was actually some of the $247,000 that we had put in here has already been spent in fiscal year 27 or fiscal year 24. Getting ahead of myself, I'm aging, I'll tell you. So with Bonnie's help, we corrected that to get that to balance and get it appropriately accounted for. I think that is all of the changes that we've done. And
What were we doing with 73? I'm sorry, I missed.
which one?
The water construction, 73, that was another short.
That'll come out of their savings and increases. So that, I'm not at all concerned about that one. Okay. That's kind of in their rate studies. And by the way, Jeff and Justin did defer one of the wells, $2 million, push it out so that we didn't have to increase the rate. We would have had to increase the rate to 4% for water on the utility side, but because they pushed that well out, because they think they have adequate water to supply the city, they were able to keep it at 3%. And so that got pushed out till fiscal year 26, right? Jeff? Okay.
Okay. Brent?
Do we have anything built in here specifically for catching up on some of this deferred maintenance?
Yes.
Can you explain to us where this is
It's in
at?
Fund 78. So Fund 78, right?
Right.
We set aside 750,000 and plus a little bit from the, it's basically 750,000 plus a little bit of the tax increase. We're building that balance so that we can again handle things like the HVAC.
Right.
HVAC.
That we know is a problem here, right?
Right.
We also have Fund 16, which is an emergency service fund, right here, emergency repair, line 48, where we put in 250,000 and plus an interfund movement of interfund activity of another 50,000 for a total of $1 million. I know the question's gonna come up. So this is coming out of the excess interest earned to fund these.
Right. And not that we want to do this, but just for discussion purposes, could you discuss the foregone and how that works? And that could, assuming that we felt there was not enough money being set aside for catch up on this deferred maintenance, capitalizing on that foregone balance could be an option. Is that right?
Yes, so the foregone, we're allowed to take, total tax could be 8%. 3% is what we get. 1% of the foregone, which again would be based on that 33 million I was talking about. We can take 1% that can be used for O&M, operational and maintenance, which is about 330,000. So we can take that amount and add that to the 993,000 for the 1% foregone. The other percent, the other 3% that you can get is really for cap. It has to be very specific. Excuse me.
Bless you.
Tough question. I just needed a diversion so I could think. That other 3% has to be specific. It can't be used broadly. It has to be, we're gonna buy X or we're gonna fix X, and that 3%. But again, we're capped at a total of 8%.
Right. And that does raise property taxes to do that too.
Yes.
Right. Got it.
Okay, all right.
We okay to go ahead then with this and get it ready for publication?
Well, are there any other changes that the council needs to know of?
That's all the changes since Tuesday.
Council, any questions, any other follow-up questions or with this? Then we're not going to have you prepare for publication, but this is what we will be talking about in July 11th so that you
Right.
can prepare it for
Right, because
publication
we have to
going out the
publish
next week.
on the 12th.
Yeah,
So-
yeah.
Thank you for the clarification.
And so it sounds like we've got a lot to think about and consider for our July 11 meeting. But right now, this is what we'll move forward with, and I'm confident there will be some changes July 11, but we'll see what they look like then. Corey?
So will you go back to Fund 78? If I heard you correctly, which I believe I did, Fund 78, you said that was funded via the earned interest,
So
correct?
this has been let me back up just a little. Prior to this year, right, this was set aside as a savings account, if you will, for funds like within the general fund where they don't have their own reserve. If they wanted to buy a specific truck or something like that, they could set aside money out of what they saved at the end of the year, and that was put into Fund 78. Last year, we funded $1 million into Fund 78 to start building that up. This year, again, would like to continue that. I'm just saying that this year, with some of the interest earned, the excess interest earned, want to dedicate $1 million into Fund 16 and Fund 78. There will be other contributions into that towards the end of the year as departments want to, or funds want to save for specific things.
So, that answers it. That's good. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Sounds like we've got some direction for the 11th, and then we'll go from there, so.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your time and your efforts. This is always a difficult time to get through and a difficult process, but I think we're moving along pretty good. Thank you very much, and with that, we are adjourned.